Good afternoon. It's afternoon right here. Interestingly, both Tirwan and all of my friends from Kurdistan, but I didn't know that they were also invited. I think he covered a lot of things about the referendum decision, but I will still go back to how the decision was made to better understand the situation. We are perfectly sure that the Kurdistan regional government did not initially plan to declare independence after the referendum, nor that it planned to have that much of escalated tensions with Iraq and the regional governments. That is precisely because the US presence in Iraq has acted as a mediating actor since the liberation of Iraq in 2003 between Erbil and Baghdad. But this time, the US-led international coalition appeared to be in support of the central Iraqi government rather than mediating between Erbil and Baghdad. That being said, the Kurdistan regional government did not have a determined position to insist on the referendum despite offers of negotiations, renewed talks with the central Iraqi government. So we all had the impression that the KRG might have delayed the referendum in exchange for renewed talks with Iraq with regards to its the disputed territories issue, the share of revenues from the disputed territories, and as well as from Kurdistan region proper, the issues of the Peshmerga salaries and equipment that have been suspended by the central Iraqi government over past 7 years, I think, and some other issues that the KRG would be willing to sit on the negotiations table to discuss, and then could postpone the referendum to a near future date that would have seen more negotiated positions by both sides. Neither of these happened. The KRG didn't get what it wanted to see from the central Iraqi government. There was no negotiations about the disputed territories. There was no negotiations about the share of oil revenues. Prime Minister Abadi said straightforward when a Kurdish delegation visited Baghdad last month that the KRG's suspended budget will not be paid back. And in the meantime, the Iranian-backed or influenced or commanded, whatever you want to call, the Shiite militias, Hashd al-Shabi, were vowing to attack Kurdistan in case if it even attempts to hold some kind of a voting in the disputed territories. Alongside that, the US and the international coalition picked up a position that the Kurds did not expect this to escalate that quickly, forcing KRG to make compromises to central Iraqi government, including a potential withdrawal from the disputed territories of Sinjar, of Kirkuk, Diyala, Salahuddin, and forget about the unpaid budget for the past 4 years. Never demand the suspended military equipment and the salaries of the Kurdistan regional Peshmerga forces, and to re-engage in negotiations to convince Baghdad that it would continue the negotiations, actually. So what was offered by the coalition was a proposal to re-engage in talks for future talks, which has caused a significant turmoil in the Kurdistan region when it came to the domestic politics, because the Kurdish government, led by the KDP and the PUK, the two main parties, could not accept a deal that actually meant no deal, and explain it to the population that they started a campaign for an independence referendum, but they came back with nothing from Baghdad, and they had no international support to do nothing in northern Iraq. Today we know that the referendum will be held on 25 September. I'm going on Friday, so you can be sure it's going to be held. It is going to be held. So I wouldn't pay that much of money to the tickets, never. And second, we know that we cannot be sure about KRG's post-referendum attitude. We knew that the KRG would refrain from declaring independence, and even in the case of a yes win in the referendum, the region would go into negotiations with Baghdad, but what they have recently got from the central Iraqi government was the sacking of the governor of Kirkuk, Najmuddin Karim, and the Iraqi parliament is preparing to sack the entire Kirkuk provincial council. There are even jokes in Kurdistan now that the Iraqi government may decide to sack the entire Kurdish population, because and what makes the problem more complicated is that there's no way for instance, in negotiations to end up with an agreement that the Kirkuk governor will be assigned again with his position, which will require elections. It's not going to happen soon, and in the disputed territories where the conflict is still ongoing. So, with this being said, we can be sure that the post-referendum negotiations can achieve nothing unless this time Iraq makes compromises by reversing its parliamentary decision to remove the governor of Kirkuk and to turn a blind eye on KRG's annexation of Kirkuk and other disputed territories, which is simply impossible to take place. Then the question that we have in our minds is today, if this is the case, then what might be the change in KRG's post-referendum attitude? So I wouldn't be so much surprised to see KRG declaring an earlier independence, presumably in the next 2 years or even earlier, because of the current pressure on the region, especially from the central Iraqi government and the US-led coalition. I believe so many people wonder about the relations between the KRG and the US, and if the regional government's alliance with the coalition will survive this crisis. The answer is yes. The KRG is going to stay a loyal US ally, but may witness some sanctions on the region that are likely to be temporary. The region's military relations can see some suspensions, but given the ongoing wars in Syria and in Iraq, we do not expect the coalition's presence in the Kurdistan region to come to an end. For your information, today, the entirety of the operations in Syria are supplied through the Kurdistan regional government. The US-led international coalition has presence in Iraq, in military bases, but no US soldier can, or US military convoys cannot trust the roads anymore, or consider the rest of Iraq as a base for supplying operations in a neighboring country, where the war will continue. And if the war comes to an end, the war for the balance of power between the US and Russia will continue. Given that the KRG has no intention to go against the US government, especially in when it comes to the military cooperation, as the KRG's Ministry of Peshmerga continues to promise in almost daily statements that the regional government will stay a US ally no matter what the crisis, what kind of a shape the crisis takes in the next months, we can be sure that the alliance will continue. But the KRG may face sanctions. According to recent polls, yes vote wins both in the Kurdistan region proper and in the disputed territories, where the majority of the population are Kurdish. And it should be underlined that the disputed territories are much bigger than where the referendum will be held. So the referendum will be held in those parts of the disputed territories that are controlled by KRG Peshmerga forces. So doesn't cover the entirety of the disputed territories. For instance, the city center of Diyala is a disputed territory too, or Tel Afar, that has been recently captured by joint Iraqi forces, is a disputed territory too, but there will be no referendum there. And when it comes to the risk of armed confrontations, yes. On the 25th of September, expect armed confrontations between KRG Peshmerga and the Shiite militia forces in the disputed territories. Not in Kirkuk, because the map of territorial control does not allow this for Shiite militias to launch any kind of attacks against the KRG Peshmerga forces, but in the areas like Tuzhurmatu, Mendeli, Süleymanbek, Jalollah, Daquk, the front lines are porous and very close to each other. And in case, which is going to be the case, if the KRG Peshmerga forces help the elections committee to hold the referendum in some of the disputed towns that has both Peshmerga and Shiite militia presence, like Tuzhurmatu, we will see clashes happening there. I've talked with friends within the KRG; they're expecting the clashes too. But a major military campaign against the KRG Peshmerga by the central Iraqi government is unlikely today. Although the Iraqi parliament has tasked Haider al-Abadi, the prime minister, to take every necessary measure to prevent the secession of the Kurdistan region from Iraq.
Jen, before we move on to questions, could you perhaps elaborate a little bit about the Israeli connection?
Well, of course, I'm not gonna skip it. And Abadi is under heavy pressure by his own counterparts, by his fellow Shiite partismen and partners, who are preparing for the elections, presumably to happen in April 2018, where the sole U.S. ally in Iraq, Haider al-Abadi, may lose in the elections. So, and one of the ways of causing this is to increase pressure on Abadi, use the ISIS card, and use the Kurdish card, which may in turn force Abadi to actually take an adventurous step and launch a military campaign against KRG, which is definitely being talked in Iraq today on both sides, in the Kurdish and in the Iraqi side. And of course, we have all seen all these Israeli flags in all the demonstrations of Kurdistan region, and the demonstrations elsewhere in the world capitals, from Washington to Brussels. But more interestingly, we have seen the Israeli flags in the streets of Erbil, and in the biggest rally in the history of the Kurdistan region last week, where 200,000 people attended, where the President Barzani delivered a speech. We could see Israeli flags. Is there a problem with this?
I'm not sure once again, sorry.
No problem. One interesting feature of those flags were none of them were homemade, so they were imported. Definitely, some people were waiting for the right moment to show this non-Jewish form of Zionism in Kurdistan.
So
and
they were homemade or they were?
They were not. They were not. They were perfectly made, fabricated Israeli flags. You can't import in a day or two, so probably some people saved them somewhere and waited for those days. And another interesting fact was the KRG allowed the protesters to hold the Israeli flags because it's a taboo for KRG to declare it has already known relations with Israel. But this time they were like, okay, let them do, and the flags were on display in Barzani's very own speech in Dohuk. That is actually, I'm not going to go into the history of the relations between the KRG and between the Kurds of Iraq and Israel. We all know about it. But the thing is, what's happening today, as Israel being the only Western state supporting the Kurdish independence in Iraq openly, is creating some sort of a unprecedented sympathy among the Kurds, among those who already had the sympathy, which are very happy now because their fellow Kurds are also developing the same sympathy. And the rest, who are very happy to see a Western state coming out, who has gone through the Holocaust, a genocidal campaign, that the Kurds have been mentioning to express their grievances about the Enfal campaign of the 1980s. And the support comes from Jerusalem, And the Kurds call Kirkuk, the disputed city, as the Jerusalem of Kurdistan. And just today, the governor of Kirkuk said Kirkuk is the Jerusalem of Kurdistan. It's not going to be given back. So these parallel understandings of things, apart from the historical connections that so many towns in Kurdistan are named after the Bible, and like Al-Kosh, Akre, and etc., creating all these bonds between the Jewish and the Kurdish people. But the bold move by Israel to declare this support has created a sympathy also at the state level. The KRG has been very much concerned about its relations with Israel being revealed. Although I personally know that there's no solid factual relations today between Erbil and Jerusalem, but we know there were strong relations back in the 70s and 80s when Israeli military forces were even present in Iraqi Kurdistan assisting Kurdish Peshmerga. The KRG is concerned about these relations because it brings the aggression, be it rhetorical or practical, of the neighboring countries and the Arabs on to Kurdistan. But apparently, allowing Israeli flags to fly high and a very high-level response to central Iraqi government with regards to questions about Israel indicated that the KRG has come to an understanding, at least for now, to use Israel's support for some kind of a back-channel diplomatic campaign for itself. It believes that Israel's support can help the Kurds in the Western countries, while it will further complicate the situation, which is already complicated in the Middle East. So 3 days ago, the former Iraqi prime minister, who is now the vice president of Iraq, Nouri al-Maliki, said the establishment of Kurdistan in northern Iraq will be the second Israel, and the Arabs will not allow this at any cost. I was personally not expecting any kind of a response from the KRG that would reference Israel, but there were interesting responses. The deputy speaker of the parliament, Jamal Aminki, of Kurdistan, of course, came out and said, I remind Nouri al-Maliki that he himself killed more Arabs than Israel did. And then he vowed that the region will protect itself, without saying that they are, or they not, the second Israel. And today, with Najmuddin Karim's Kirkuk governor's remarks that Kirkuk is the Jerusalem of Kurdistan, just during the days where the topic of second Israel is trending on the Twitter in Iraq, using the word Jerusalem and Israel openly makes a lot of sense. The Kurds have not been that much close about Israel, but their position has always been Iraq doesn't have any relations with Israel. We can't initiate those relations ourselves, but we have nothing against Israel, and we have nothing against the Arabs. We're neutral. But yesterday, the deputy speaker of the parliament was saying Israel had done nothing wrong against the Kurds, which is another bold move. So all in all, to sum up, we're expecting clashes on the day of referendum and afterwards. The referendum will be held because I'm flying to there. It should be held, and the KRG is going to see a yes vote victory. May not be 99% like in Syria, but it's probably going to be like something around 70s, or for the Kurds to win. The opposition in the Kurdistan region was permitted to campaign for no, and they're still campaigning for no, although their campaign is very limited. And the post-referendum attitude of Kurdistan is currently in question, that we cannot know what will be the regional government's response to all this pressure mounting on the region, and in case if Iraq launched a military campaign. Thank you.
Okay, and we'll open it to questions now.
Can you just, before the question, just briefly go over your biography, where you were born?
Oh, I was born in Turkey, first called northern Kurdistan. I was born very close to the Iranian border in Turkey, in the east, in Van.
Van?
Yeah. But my family was exiled in 1996, so I grew up in the capital, Ankara. And when I was 18, I moved to Iraqi Kurdistan, lived there until 2010. And in 2010, I made a fake aliyah to Israel. I came here for a year-long degree, and I met some people and stayed here for some work. And it's been 7 years. I'm here writing my PhD at the Tel Aviv University, and I'm the coordinator of the Kurdish Studies program at the Moshe Dayan Center.
I'd like to ask about the relationship between Ankara and KRG. Turkey has a good relationship with KRG, but like they are opposed against this referendum. But what kind of reaction, like after referendum, do you expect from Turkey, like economic sanctions or military action? I don't think it's going to happen, but like, do you expect any reaction?
I've just written an article on this, going to be published on Sunday, so I'm not going to reveal details. But definitely KRG and Turkey are economic partners. They haven't been strategic allies. There was very limited military relations between the two entities, between Ankara and Erbil, but they have been very good economic partners. And Turkey was the midwife for the KRG's economic independence. Especially after 2013, after KRG lost its budget share from Iraq, KRG's oil was exported, even to Israel, through Turkey, with small problems between Ankara and Erbil, but it continues today. But to understand Turkey's reactions to the KRG, one should look at Turkey's internal domestic politics, where ultranationalism is on a rapid rise. Even though the AKP is an Islamist party, the ruling AKP is an Islamist party, it's not an ultranationalist Turkic party supporting pagan Turkish beliefs of the Central Asia, as his partners today are doing. It concerns Turkey, but it concerns the ruling AKP when it comes to the rise of these people. And the AKP has to respond in a way to meet the demands of the ultra-nationalist masses that are currently voting for the AKP, but may not vote for the AKP again in 2019 because another center-right party is currently being established in the region, and the most recent polls from last week shows that the party, without even declaring its name, is expected to get some 14% from the votes in 2019, causing a huge problem. So the AKP has to move to take action, which is going to be an ultra-nationalist action within the borders of Turkey. But we do not expect Turkey to have any sort of a practical measure against Iraqi Kurdistan. They cannot fight a war in Iraqi Kurdistan while they're already fighting in Syria on two fronts and already fighting on multiple fronts in Turkey. It's not going to make any military sense for Turkey to fight in northern Iraq another war. The second thing is, can they close the border with KRG? Yes, they can. It happened many times. But even in 2007, 8, 9, when the borders were frequently closed by Turkey, the longest closure was 2 weeks. So it is a hard task to keep the borders closed with a country that you have over 8 billion of annual trade. And it's not only KRG, the entirety of the trade between Turkey and Iraq are through the KRG. So when the borders are closed, after a while, you should also expect some responses from the central Iraqi government, maybe mediating between them to open the borders so they can start resume imports from Turkey. Other than that, the rhetorical pressure on the KRG by Turkey is likely to continue. The Kurds are ready for this. They have seen worse with Turkey. They were on the brink of war many times, especially in 2008, Even the President Barzani was on the front lines in his military uniform, waiting for the Turkish army to show up. It's not going to repeat again. The relations are so complex today with 1,300 Turkish companies operating in Iraqi Kurdistan. What is more sophisticated, what makes it more sophisticated is that among those 1,300 companies, probably 1,100 of them are Kurds from Turkey. So who have dual loyalties to Turkey and Iraqi Kurdistan, and neither of the sides can know which side they will pick up if relations deteriorate severely. So expect the rhetorical, verbal pressure on the KRG to continue, but do not expect any sort of a practical measure against KRG by Turkey. Turkey will limit its reactions within its borders and within the borders of its support for the central Iraqi government.
Any questions before we move to our third speaker?
Yes,
Yes, Alfred.
the Kurdish political leaders formulate any position towards the situation here between Israel and Palestine?
In personal conversations, yes. Yes, but in officially, no. Once, I mean, the former Iraqi president Jalal Talabani had said in, I think, early 2000s, after the liberation of Iraq in 2003, that Kurdistan will open its consulate or representation office in Israel as soon as Iraq opens it. It was a very political comment. But things, I mean, the relations between KRG and Israel may not materialize into practical contact between the two entities, may not materialize as some sort of a trade partner, economic partnership, or any military alliances. Both sides, people who know both sides, know that there's a high level of sympathy at the state level and at the society level. So I don't think they need to put forward any kind of a roadmap for relations with Israel, because relations with Israel is awaiting the day KRG will declare independence. I'll give you a tip. The day KRG declares independence, the Kurdish government, the ruling parties, cannot explain to the local population why they did not open a consulate or an embassy in Israel immediately. It will be demanded by the Kurds. So the only answer would be the roadmap is the independence. KRG declares independence, and its diplomatic missions will be here in Israel.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.